Okay, this episode is about graphic novels, which is an important literary genre that combines text and visual art to tell great stories. As you can see, I could not resist bringing this beautiful limited edition of a graphic novel home. It is the latest work of two of my favorite artists called François Schuiten and Benoît Peeters. In this episode, I want to share with you several of the beautiful books they created, because in my humble opinion, they have elevated the art of storytelling through graphic novels to a whole different level. Welcome back to Bold Books and Bones. My first encounter with their art was many years ago. It was a time before the internet existed. Now, one night when I was half asleep and channel surfing on my television, I accidentally stumbled upon what looked like a strange dystopian documentary about Brussels. Back then, it was the city that I knew would become my future home, so I was curious and kept on watching. Now, in that program, the journalist claimed to have discovered a secret society in Brussels that knows about a passage between the city of Brussels and a parallel city called Brussels. I must say I was a bit confused about what I just saw, also because I missed the first 15 minutes of the documentary, so I thought I did not fully understand the story. I let it for what it was and paid no further attention. But then, several years later, I accidentally found a VHS cassette in a graphic novel bookstore with precisely that documentary on it. It is actually called Le Dossier B, and it turned out to be the work of François Schuiten and Benoît Peeters. So now I could watch the full documentary and learn more about these hidden gateways that transports you from our world to a parallel world. And it is suggested that one of the gateways can be found in this extraordinary building called the Palace of Justice in Brussels. It is a masterpiece of architecture, and it has a complex and maze-like internal structure. The history of this building is in itself a phenomenal story, and there is a lot of mystery around its architect, Joseph Pullard. As of 1856, he held the prestigious title of Architect of the City of Brussels. And it is known that he never produced, or at least delivered, all the plans of this incredible architectural monument. Although it was at the time the largest building of Europe. And of course, this produced a lot of problems while building it. And even today, maintaining this building is a real challenge. Also, Joseph Pullard died in unclear circumstances 4 years before the Palace of Justice was finished. So no wonder that some people believe that in this complex and mysterious building we can find one of the passages to that parallel city called Brussels. And there is not only one parallel city. The passages actually give you access to a whole different world where you will find all the so-called obscure cities. Very strange. Then again, a few years later, when I moved to Brussels, I discovered that there were graphic novels with the title The Obscure Cities. And of course, they were created by Schuiten and Peeters. Am I the only one, or can you relate to this? Do you also keep on coming across the work of an artist without really looking for it? Let me know in the comment section. Now, you might ask yourself, what is this all about? Secret passages to a parallel world with their obscure cities? Is Bold Books and Bones going mad? And precisely that is a first intriguing characteristic of their art. They create this blurry line between reality and fiction. A beautiful example of this grey zone between the reality as we know it and the obscure cities is what the artists did with this house in Brussels. It is called the House Autrique, named after the family that was the first owner. It is not just any house, it is the very first townhouse built by no other than the famous architect called Victor Horta, who was one of the founders of the incredible influential Art Nouveau movement. This art movement knew its height roughly between 1890 and 1910, and that it still influences architects, designers and artists around the world to this day. So François Schuiten and Benoît Peeters bought this house in 1996 in a rather poor condition because they realized its significance to the history of architecture. They researched it and restored it as much as possible into its original style. It is now accessible to everyone, and when you visit this milestone of Art Nouveau architecture and you know the books of the obscure cities, it might feel strangely familiar to you. Because this house was not just protected and brought back to life in the real world, but it also exists in the parallel world of the obscure cities, where you can find it among other places in this story by Schuiten and Peeters called The Theory of the Grain of Sand. Another example of this blurry line between reality and fiction is this real house with its restaurant on the ground floor. It also exists in the parallel world. You can find it in the same book of the obscure cities that I just mentioned. And look here how the Palace of Justice is featured in yet another album. Here in this obscure city, the building has its pyramid structure on top of it, exactly how the architect Joseph Pullard intended it to be. But in the real world, Pullard was forced to change it into a cupola, the shape which it still has to this day. Another beautiful example of the blurry line between our world of reality and the obscure cities is this story about a locomotive, which was the ultimate streamlined version of a steam locomotive. It was a desperate attempt by engineers in 1938 to keep the steam engine alive in a time where trains could be powered by electricity or by diesel. When François Schuiten learned about this, he once more did not overlook the historical significance of this event. It is an essential story about human mobility that is now not widely known anymore. So he brings this locomotive, this almost forgotten masterpiece of mechanical engineering, back to life. The story is called 12 because of the series number of the locomotive. And there is a play of words. In French, 12 is pronounced douze, and douce also means sweet or beauty. Therefore, in English, you find it under the name 12, the Beauty. The book tells the story of this attempt to keep the locomotive in active duty, but since it happens in the parallel world of the obscure cities, the story has its own twists and turns, and you are transported into an intriguing, out-of-this-world reality. And to make the blurry line complete, the original train still exists in reality. It sits in the beautiful train museum in Schaerbeek in Brussels. These examples show how reality becomes fiction and fiction becomes reality. And this is done in such a clever way that although you know that the passage between our world and the obscure cities is of course fictitious, still these stories tempt you to wonder and to imagine. When I immerse myself in these visual narratives, it feels as if they spark creativity and in some way expand my imaginative capacity. This is because the obscure cities are surrealistic worlds, defying the laws of reality and therefore inviting you to imagine the possibilities beyond the constraints of everyday life. And this brings us to the second reason why I enjoy the work of Schuiten and Peeters and why I recommend it. Because the storylines unfold in unexpected ways. Let me show you what I mean by using another of their great books called The Fever of Urbicande. It is a story of an architect from the obscure city called Urbicande, who is asked to examine a cube-like structure of about 15 centimeters height that was found by builders during construction works. The little cube is made from an unknown and very strong material. Now, the next day, the architect realizes that the edges of the cube start to grow into a three-dimensional lattice structure. A few hours later, the thing grows so fast that it occupies his whole office, and next, it starts to extend at a steady pace throughout the city of Urbicande. All this has, of course, quite some implications for the city and its inhabitants. I will stop here to not spoil the story for you. But what I want to illustrate with this example is that you are surprised by the way the story unfolds. And to me, this is exactly the point when reading a good fantasy story. I want to be able to say, oh, I did not see this one coming. And that is precisely what you get when you read the work of Schuiten and Peeters. Everything that happens in these stories has a consistency to it, meaning that although it is a fantastical setting, there is an internal logic that grounds the whole narrative. I enjoy it when these stories pull me out of my habitual way of thinking. The third reason why I like and recommend the work of Schuiten and Peeters is because their stories are thought-provoking. When I delve into these drawings and words, it makes me think about the current world and about the community in which I live. I want to illustrate this with yet another intriguing book called The Tower. The Tower is about a man who lives high up in a gigantic tower. He is responsible for the maintenance of the section where he lives. Now, one day he is so frustrated by the fact that the inspector had not visited his section for years that he decides to leave his post against his orders and he starts to descend the tower. But while he is on his journey, he discovers that people living at different heights of the tower live in different realities. He also becomes aware of the magnitude of the tower. And because of this, he wonders if what he thought he knew about the tower might not be the truth at all. Along his path, he encounters another man who knows more than him, and this man owns an extensive library of books about the tower. But also he does not have a full view on its scale and purpose. So our main character is determined to find out the full truth. Again, I don't want to spoil the story of the tower, so I will not share more of how it unfolds. To me, this is a truly thought-provoking narrative because it prompts me to question my beliefs. Is what I think to be true really true, or is it merely a temporary state built on my preconceived notions of reality, which are partly based on my social media feeds, the news I watch, and the books I read? To me, this graphic novel serves as a gentle reminder to remain curious and humble, always open to further explore and to learn. Because what we know is probably only a small part of a much bigger reality. But one thing that I can safely share is that the stunning drawings in this work by Schuiten are undoubtedly inspired by Piranesi, who is the famous classical archaeologist, architect and artist from the 18th century. How do we know that Schuiten was inspired by him? Because look at these famous etchings by Piranesi. Some of them depict fictitious prisons. And while you look at the drawings by Schuiten on the tower, you easily find resemblances. Another clear clue that Schuiten gives us is that the name of the main character in the tower is Giovanni Battista, which are the same first and middle names of the artist Piranesi. So once more it shows how the work of Schuiten and Peeters has many layers to it and a greater magnitude of depth that one might expect from a graphic novel. When we know all this about the work of François Schuiten and Benoît Peeters, it is not surprising that they have received many important international awards. Among them the Grand Prix de la Ville d'Angoulême in France, which is a Lifetime Achievements Award. In 2019, François Schuiten announced that after almost 45 years of telling these visual stories, he would stop creating graphic novels. But totally unexpected, he returned from retirement. So I was delighted to find this beautiful edition of a new work by them. It is called The Return of Captain Nemo. Captain Nemo is a fictional character created by the iconic French writer Jules Verne. He is the enigmatic captain of the submarine Nautilus in Verne's famous novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This book was published in 1870. In the graphic novel by Schuiten and Peeters, we encounter Captain Nemo again. He's confused and he's living in a submarine that seems to be alive. Half machine, half octopus. This work has not much text and it has a narrative that leaves you puzzled where it will bring you. And most of all, at least to me, the story seduces with its beautiful artwork. So it is a true Schuiten and Peeters masterpiece that stimulates one's brain and invites exploration into its complexities and subtleties. This story led me to discover a book written by Jules Verne that I did not know existed. It was written in 1863 and was lost for more than a century. When it was accidentally discovered in a safety box, it was finally published for the first time in 1994. An unknown book by Jules Verne? Is this true what I just said? What do you think? I can't say more, because in the tradition of the obscure cities, I prefer to keep the blurry line between reality and the other world. I hope I made you curious about the work of this Belgian-French duo. Hope to hear from you by liking this episode, subscribing to the channel or sharing it with friends. And as always, I'm looking forward to read your thoughts in the comment section. Meanwhile, stay curious and stay free.